Hello, and welcome to the Desert Island Investor Podcast, Episode 1. In this series of podcasts, private investor Mark Atkinson will be sharing some insights into how he has built up a portfolio of stocks that is both profitable and dependable. And he'll be recounting some stories and cautionary tales that will hopefully help you to achieve the same degree of success with your own investments. Today, Mark will be reviewing MTI Wireless Edge, ticker symbol MWE, which is a new addition to his portfolio. But first, some introductions. My name is Paul Kerin. I'm producing the podcast, but I'm not an investor. So, Mark, perhaps you'd like to explain how you hope I can be of use in co-hosting your podcast.
Good afternoon, Paul. I've invited Paul to co-host this series because although I want it to be of value to fellow seasoned investors, I'm hoping this will be of interest to those beginning the journey. And if I get a little bit carried away or overly technical, then Paul will be pulling me up and asking for clarity.
Right, first bit of clarity then. The Desert Island Investor, why did you pick that name for the podcast?
Yeah, well, achieving long-term dependability of investments has been my goal from the outset. And I wanted a title for the podcast that reflected really the benefits of that strategy. So the concept is, if I really was stranded on a desert island for any period of time, there'd be a high degree of certainty that the stocks would still be performing nicely on my return in the absence of any involvement whatsoever from myself.
This has obviously been a very profitable strategy for you, Mark. What's the magical ingredient?
Well, there's no magic, Paul, but I'm an investor and not a trader, and that's a big difference. It's something I'll be talking about in detail in another episode, but suffice to say that the way I've approached investing is far less stressful. I've always been in it for the long game, and thanks to the portfolio, I was able to retire from the rat race at the relatively young age of 53. So I'm here today relaxing on this imaginary beach, drinking an imaginary pina colada, but I do spend a bit of real time on real beaches, and that's something I can highly recommend.
I believe the plan is to get an episode released every couple of weeks. What can our listeners expect if they subscribe to the channel?
Well, in each episode, I'll be sharing some of the good and bad investing experiences that I've had over these 4 decades, and I'll explain how those experiences have helped me build this portfolio and how it's really paid off. Plus, I'll be reviewing one or more potential winners that are currently on my watch list. And of course, when I buy something new, I'll give a detailed account and the reasoning behind my decision.
Now, it says in my notes that we may be expecting some castaways.
Yeah, some of my fellow investors may wash up on the beach from time to time, so our listeners will find out what stories they have to tell. I was recently a guest on the Company of Mavericks podcast with Jeremy McEwen, and we interviewed the CEO of one of my holdings, Concurrent Technologies, Miles Adcock, and I will not divulge the contents of that podcast because that wouldn't be right, but hopefully leave a link in the show notes. But just like to say that they were 2 absolute gentlemen, and hopefully the podcast will be well received. And I would say that if you look at Jeremy's work, he's got a good back catalogue of interviews.
Okay, so Mark, which stock are you going to be talking to us about today?
Well, I thought I'd start with the most recent addition to the portfolio, which is a Israeli wireless technology company called MTI Wireless Edge, and they've got the ticker symbol MWE.
So this is a bit of an occasion for you, isn't it? When was the last time you actually added anything to the portfolio?
Well, the last time I added a new stock to the portfolio was 4 years ago, so it was a bit of a red letter day when I added to MTI. At the price was 54.5 pence.
Okay, so I've never heard of them. What kind of thing do they do? How large are they?
Well, their current market capitalisation is £45 million. Employee-wise, they've got circa 240 employees, and their turnover is approximately £40 million. So it's a medium-sized company.
So is it difficult trading in an international stock like that?
That's an interesting point because it's not an international stock in that it's listed on the AIM market in the UK AIM market. So that's been. I'm always a bit suspicious of companies that come to overseas companies anyway. Well, some UK companies that float on AIM. But you think, where are they floating on the AIM market and not on the domestic market? But that's been on AIM since 2006. And it's been established since 1972. So there's quite a bit of track record there that makes me feel quite at ease.
So I did a little bit of research on this, and I just wondered if you're maybe not concerned that they've pulled out of Russia and how that might affect their growth. Apparently the Russian contracts accounted for about 6% of revenue.
Yeah. Well, it's they acted very, very quickly, actually. I think it was back in March at time, something like that, that they advised that they were pulling out of Russia. Probably a smart move, so not to alienate the rest of their customers, but certainly that's reflected in the price at which I think I've paid now. That news is out in the market, and 6%, it isn't massive. So it was probably, I would imagine the wise thing to do.
Do you have any specific knowledge about business in Israel?
Not specifically, no, but I'll share with you a tool that I use for looking at the economies in which companies are based or in which they deal, and it's the Heritage Index of Economic Freedom, and that's from a US think tank, and they grade all the countries around the world according to different criteria, including rule of law, government size, regulatory efficiency, and open markets. And basically, what they're coming up with is a number and a ranking that shows how business friendly these jurisdictions are. So if we look, these are from 2022. The rankings for 2023 aren't out yet. Singapore is number one. That's the most friendly country in which to do business. And at the very bottom, ranked at 177, is North Korea. And there's certain countries that haven't got a ranking at all. Afghanistan, Somalia, and Syria for obvious reasons. So it's just a bit of a broad tool. It's not foolproof, but there's some interesting rankings there. I mean, you mentioned Russia just earlier on. That's in 2022 at 113. So that's suggesting there's easier places in which to do commerce than Russia, and that's been proved. And now Israel, as an example, that's at 43. That's I think classified as moderately free for their economy. The UK, by comparison, were 24th. And then looking, some interesting countries below Israel, France is number 52 and Italy are number 57, and they are members of the G7. So those are economies that you would think are quite developed. So it's just a tool that I refer to. I mean, just going back to, the one that's ranked at 176 is Venezuela, that's in the news quite a bit. And I've got some personal experience of that, in that one of my holdings is a company called Smurfit Kappa, who have got a large global footprint. And going back several years, they had a corrugated plant out in Venezuela. And the government thought, that's a really good asset. We'll have that. So, and they've seized control of it. So what you don't want if you're purchasing property or making an investment overseas is that somebody suddenly says, we want it. And I think it's an effective tool to use, especially if you're into something like mining and resource companies, because if you are buying an asset, say might be Zimbabwe or something like that, and then you're tunneling for gold, and then you finally find it, you don't want to lose that asset overnight. So, like I say, none of these things are foolproof. Anything can happen, but it's just a handy guide, I find.
With it being an Israeli company, does that not make access a little difficult for you? Because I know you need to do your research, and the AGMs are important in your strategy. Yeah,
well, you mentioned AGMs, and handily, they're held in London. So that's an effective. If I wanted to get to the AGM, that's quite easy for me to do. But also, I've got to say, with regard to the CEO, Moni Borovitz, he's communicated with me directly. which is always encouraging when you've got members of the board who are prepared to share their information on the business to both shareholders and prospective shareholders. And I think the communication is good. Most companies report every 6 months, but they report on a quarterly basis, so there's good visibility there. And they've done a number of presentations on the Investor Meet Company, which is, again, another good website to use, and they're followed by Q&A. And in between that, any contract wins are trotted out through RNSs. So, there's good visibility throughout the year as to, the fortunes of the business. And also you can have a look at their website, which I've got to say that looks a little bit clunky, but there's also some valuable information on there as well.
Do they report in shekels?
No, they deal in shekels, being Israeli based, but they report in dollars. So that does mean with a lot of companies out there's some currency movement, and it's a consideration, but it's not something that causes me any great concerns, because I tend to think that these things even themselves up over the long run anyway.
So what exactly does MTI Wireless Edge do?
Yeah, well, it's said earlier on, it's wireless technology, and they've got 3 main activities across the group. So that's something I like, in that it's not got, that phrase, all their eggs in one basket. They've got an antennas side of the business, which is, that's got some drivers with the next generation of communications. I think we're moving along. Is it to 5G now, Paul?
I think a lot of the UK is on 5G now.
Yeah, I think they're trotting India out as a major market for them, and interestingly, that's where they manufacture a lot of their product. So that's and I would imagine these are continually going to, as soon as one generation comes along, the next one's going to be lined up. And defence is a major market for antennas. Then you've got the irrigation side, whereby instead of just having we talk about how water being scarce, and it's an increasingly important resource for us around the world now, and with climate problems that we've got to be a lot smarter with how we use our water. And this is a means by which they can regulate the irrigation of land a lot more efficiently. So, if you've got a downpour overnight, it doesn't just automatically come on. So that's another interesting sector. And they've also got a distribution and professional consultancy service. So across all these three sides, they all seem to be going in the right direction, and they're quite evenly distributed. It's not as though just one part of the business accounts for like 85% or something like that. They're roughly evenly proportioned.
What features of the company attracted you then, as from an investment point of view?
Well, it's well diversified across the markets in which it deals, and also around the world. Israel accounts for over 50% of its sales, but it's got exposure elsewhere. So that's always an interesting point. It's got net cash, which is also something that I always like, in that if you've got cash, you're not reliant on the banks, and if you've got cash, you can't go bust. So very, very basically, that's an appeal to me. And management have got a large percentage in the business. The Borovitz family have got 31.4%, which is they've got what we call skin in the game. So it's in their interest that this works. And like I said, the management have been engaged. The communication looks good, and there's certain things like the customer base looks quite sticky, what we call sticky, in that 68% of customers have been with them for over 10 years. So it doesn't look like your customer base is going to bleed away overnight. And then they've got service agreements with certain products that they do. So that's a gift that keeps on giving. You don't just sell the product and then that's the end of the story. You've got recurring revenues from that. And then you've got things like patents that make it, give you a little bit of exclusivity. And all these things are like barriers to entry. So these are box ticking things for me. These are all good signs that I look for. And obviously I've done some this has been on my watch list for some little time, and I've done my research. I never go in really big on an initial holding, but I find that once I bring it into the portfolio, it stimulates me to do a lot more research and dig a lot deeper. And hopefully, if this stays into the portfolio for a number of years, I'll get to know it very, very well, like a lot of the other holdings that I've got.
What percentage of your portfolio are overseas companies then, or foreign companies?
Yeah, I would say there is only about, I think there's only this company and one other, which is Somero Enterprises, who are based in the US. I would say it's just about 10%, which is within my area of risk that I'm prepared to be exposed to. Again, all these things. I've added this to the portfolio. This is number 36 in the portfolio. Set against that is that it's a broad spectrum of businesses that I've got. Now, if I had a narrower portfolio, if it was perhaps, I don't know, say 10, I might not take that kind of that risk. But there's risk in everything, in every investment you've got. You've got to balance it up and think, well, do the opportunities outweigh the disadvantages?
Right, all the boxes are ticked for MTI Wireless Edge. What's their ticker symbol again, Mark?
It's MWE. Ticker symbol MWE.
Well, that wraps it up for this episode. We hope that you enjoyed it, although please remember that the content is provided for general information only and it does not constitute professional financial advice. If you would like to hear more anecdotes and stock reviews from Mark, please press the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for listening. See you next time.